possibility might be. But as it turns out, in additional research I performed in the literature, it turns out fluoride actually assists the DMT and other tryptamine neurotransmitters in accomplishing their task. It allows it direct passage into the cells and into the nerve endings. So fluoride actually has been documented as a beneficial effect in having the pineal gland do what it does. Now, the cells in the pineal gland are the same kind of cells that you find in the retina in your back of your eye. In fact, it's called in some other animals, simple animals, the parietal organ. And the reason why is it functions literally as a third eye. It has light sensitivity. It'll actually transmit information from light, really just like your eye does. Now, it may process it in a different way, but it actually takes light signals, converts it into something for the brain. And so it was considered a third eye in a number of animals, but ours is actually embedded, but it still has those kind of things. So it's considered a sensory organ. The Eastern world has often called it the third eye. So if you hear a New Age teaching about the third eye, and they usually put it right between your forehead, even you'll notice the Eastern world will put that little dot in India right there. It's right in the direction of the pineal gland. So they understand there's something going on there. One interesting author of the early 20th century, H.P. Lovecraft, who was the most prominent occult author, he had a very famous book he wrote, a story called From Beyond. It was later made a movie. But in this story, a machine was built that actually would stimulate people's pineal glands, people who came close to the machine. It would actually use that as a technique to send them into an alternate dimension. And these alternate dimensions were populated by very malevolent beings so that they could actually harm and even kill people that were there. So he also was one who envisioned technology as a means by which to stimulate this pineal gland and a connection dimensionally. René Descartes, the famous mathematician and philosopher, he thought that the pineal gland was the physical portal to the spirit world. That was the place where everything going on in our body and mind went through that point to connect somehow spiritually with God or whoever. Now, something that I would propose is just a hypothesis, something for consideration, is that neutralizing this action of the pineal gland, I think, is a possibility that it might be part of what's alluded to by the flaming sword in Genesis, that actually keeps man away from the Garden of Eden and from partaking of the tree of life. This was initially just a hunch of mine because there was such a close connection between mankind and the Garden of Eden and spirit beings, whether it be God or whether it be Satan or others. Obviously, man showed that he was incapable of being able to act responsibly in that kind of close environment. And my initial suspicions were that in addition to having a physical angel with a physical sword and a physical garden, that there was an additional representation there of some kind of protective block that God put to try to keep our actions of using some kind of means of using our pineal glands to contact the spirit world. And my suspicion was further augmented by the fact that these dark fallen spirit beings came down shortly after the fall and began showing natural ways for men to actually use natural roots and things like this to overcome this barrier that was put in the body. This MAO, as I mentioned before, is present in your gastrointestinal system and will actually dissipate DMT unless you inhibit it and provide extra DMT. And in fact, that's what these particular roots do that have been used of old in folk religion, in Wicca, in activities like this. They were taught by these fallen angels, and I believe it was to get around what was involved in this protection, i.e. the flaming sword in Genesis to keep from the tree of life. Now, to support that, I've done some research in that passage again. These flaming swords, along with the cherubim that were there, were placed to keep man from Eden and from the tree of life, or the place of God's presence, the place of the delights of spirit contact and communication. Cherubim were always seen in the Scripture as God's guardians, and here they were guardians to protect the path of the tree of life. If you look at these words, you'll actually see it. It's a path or direction that they are actually inhibiting in the Hebrew. Now, the word flaming in this particular passage in Genesis chapter 3 is the Hebrew word, I believe it's pronounced lahat, and the meaning of flaming, its primary use is to use occult or magical arts. It is an occult hidden from view meaning, which is very fascinating. In fact, that same word is only used in one other verse in the Bible, and it's used to describe the enchantments of the Egyptian magicians. The Egyptian magicians, when they confronted Moses and they threw their rods down and they became snakes, the enchantments they used, and that self-same word that the magicians described there, were ones who knew secret occult practices, according to the definition of the Bible. This enchantments was the same word used here for flaming. Now, the word Kareb, I believe is pronounced, is in fact representing a sword, a knife, or, curiously, a tool for cutting stone. So the flaming sword described in this passage, that the sword, the Hebrew word for the sword itself, can represent a sword or knife, but a tool for cutting stone, which makes me wonder, is there any connection to this ancient knowledge of stone cutting tools in Freemasonry, and a connection of these tools being needed to be overcome to reestablish this connection? The last word there, where it says that it goes to and fro, waving to and fro, is a Hebrew word, hifak. And that particular word actually means not only to go to and fro, but to transform oneself. So the possible explanation of these Hebrew words is possible that this particular device used to inhibit our access to the tree is something that is an occult or hidden means of using a sword, knife, or some kind of tool to transform yourself. So there's an inhibition of the transformation. And the discussion of keeping the tree alive, it says, is to inhibit or to restrain. So there's an activity of the cherubim to restrain this activity, this occult activity or hidden activity, using tools by which to transform yourself. So I think that's very curious when we think about passages in the New Testament when it says that the man of sin will not be revealed until the restrainer is taken away, until he who restrains, and then will become apparent that he's there, one should be seen. So I'm not sure if there's a connection or not, but it's very curious. Another case that actually a listener to Future Quake pointed out after one of our presentations mentions, and it may or may not have a connection here, but it is a curiosity. The incident in which Jacob wrestled with God, and God blessed him, God touched the hollow of his thigh, but he wrestled, he faced him face to face. Jacob names that place Pinael, P-E-N-I-E-L, slightly different spelling, Pinael, almost identical pronunciation. Could be just a coincidence. But the word Pinael in Strong's Concordance means, I have seen a divine being face to face, yet my life is preserved. And in fact, he recites this again in Genesis 32:30. So it sounds very similar to the kind of experiences that these people have had where they have seen beings they would call gods, and were in fear of their very life from this contact. But he made it a name there, and whether there's a connection or not, I don't know. But Pinael has a very interesting history after that. It was picked as the headquarters of the northern kingdom of Israel at the time that they went into occult worship and occult practices and set up idols, golden calves idols for worship. They made that the head of the kingdom for the northern kingdom, this particular location. Now, pineal gland. It's typically represented as a pine cone in its representation because of its shape, and that leads to some very curious representations in ancient mythology and in art. If you look in the ancient followers of Osiris, you will actually see that he carries a shaft, a rod or shaft that he carries with a pine cone on the top of the shaft. Similarly, Dionysus, who was a liminal god, or a god that controlled the contact between the spirit world and human world, who actually had a process by which his followers entered an altered state via drugs to be able to make this contact and this